Hello, and today we're going to talk about dimensions of a game world. And as you can see, there's 5 right here, and the most commonly talked about, well, the most commonly talked about is physical, and then temporal probably being second, temporal meaning time. But today we're not going to talk about those first two. We're going to actually look more into the 3 E's there, the environmental, emotional, and ethical. Because even though the first 2 are actually super important, a lot of times the last 3 get forgotten in video games, or maybe not forgotten, but trimmed down, cast aside, left the meager portion of the thought process. So let's take a look at these. Environmental dimension. Now, when you think of a game's appearance, the look of the world, how everything is set up and set around you, whether it's architecture, plants, whatever, this is what's considered here. However, we can also have a lot of things that stir into this, meaning, everybody's beliefs. So in other words, let's do a period piece, like in the Old West, just to give an example. There, if you want to think of the Old West, you'd probably think, well, it's going to be probably sunny and dusty. Things are a little dirtier, things are a little more baked, because we always kind of think of it as happening in Texas or the Southwest kind of. And that can also affect, how the houses are made, right? Because they might have root cellars. They might be made simply because it might be poorer areas or certainly more rural. And then we start looking at the people as well. What are their attitudes? Well, back then they might have just been in survival mode. They may not have been, thinking about the refugee crisis and how to handle that sort of thing. They instead might have, just been, okay, we're going to live very simply by very simple rules, and we'll forget the rest. This shapes the environment in every context. In fact, if you've ever seen any movie of a Western, you probably notice that there's always like the church. There's this one church with a nice prominent cross, because they kind of give that idea that at least some of these people are God-fearing people, and they're relying on God just to stay alive. So when you're making a game like this, you're going to have to put all those pieces in. Not necessarily, you don't have to have the church with the pieces, but you have to kind of think of these, maybe these dried out boards, or these very dirt roads, that sort of thing. Laying every little piece out so that people have everything believable. If you come in and use like a real, like a shiny fawn or metallic material on everything, it's probably not going to feel right. It might look great, but it might not feel right. The other thing is that the people themselves are going to dovetail into the way they dress, how they look, the way they're shaped. If you think about, like, say, the Eskimos, they're usually a little on the pudgy side, and the reason why they're pudgy is because they need that extra fat to survive the cold all the time. And it just, so all these little things kind of add up into that environmental nature. So when you make a game, that all these things should serve these pieces. If you look at, like, say, 70s, maybe 80s TV, one of the things you'll notice is that they are very bare compared to modern TV sets, because they didn't have the money, to be honest with you. So if they had like a deranged killer, he'd have like one strange picture in his house, and they kind of all stared at that picture when they investigated or something like that. They nowadays they go and they'll just flood the room with all these weird images and maybe sculptures or pictures, photos, whatever. Now, that's the advantage of having more money, but that also gives it more of a believability to it. And then likewise, we should probably do this with the games. Try to pack as much as you can, but as the last bullet's going to say, without overloading the disk space or overloading the people watching. So everything should kind of serve the game and its context. Now, this should dovetail nicely into the emotional dimension. Because now you've demonstrated well. We have the right feel. Again, let's go back to the Western hot. The browns, grays, browns. You have the simple houses that are maybe falling apart a little bit. The dirt roads. The characters who might be most of them a little shabby, and how they react to each other might be cautious, courteous, but maybe not interacting with strangers well. So in other words, they keep it really simple when a stranger talks, but then when they go into the end, they might let it all hang out, so to speak. So now we have that environment all set up. Now the people actually can kind of just fall into place when that happens. Now when we talk about the individual players playing it, and by that I mean like the protagonist, or if you have a group of protagonists, how do we start developing them for the game, and how do we make them unique? And I'm going to jump to that second bullet right away, is that, there's two ways you can do it. You can give them a challenge and see how they react, because, they always say that's kind of like where the true person's character comes out. Or they can just talk with a bunch of characters, and how they discuss things will sure enough show their kind of points of view. The don't worry about tension sub-bullet there is important. Modern television is perfectly displays this. I think it kind of, actually, believe it or not, culminated from the reality TV shows, where tension was part of the game, and that way people could have opinions about the individual players. Well, I think they've actually taken that type of tension in a lot of reality and kind of placed it now in the fiction world, where again people can like or dislike characters, and then they can discuss after the show's over about them, and think about that now for your game. Why not do that for your game? Have these kind of blurry characters that maybe ruffle each other's feathers because they're not both good. Maybe they are both good, but maybe they're good in different ways. If you do it too much, it can be a little annoying, but if you introduce it, it actually gives characters much more of a distinctness to them. And then, and with tension, you can always bring them back together at the end and give them the super happy ending if you want. That's actually not a bad thing. And actually, it actually will heighten that feel-good moment too. And obviously, the cliches, obviously we want to avoid them, but I'm always bothered by this day, because someone says I don't use cliches, but then later on they'll say, well, we use the tried and true method of the authors have used through time periods. Well, what's a cliche and what's tried and true? You know what I mean? So you might have to use an archetype. You might have to use a character, the bad boy or the reluctant hero or something like that. Yes, they're cliches, but they're also accepted. Villains have a certain way of acting. Good guys have a certain way of acting. You don't want to go too far down the path. In fact, it's nice to kind of maybe give them a compliment. So maybe, okay, this is the traditional anti-hero, but he does this as well. And then all of a sudden things get flipped, so that cliche doesn't set in, and he becomes more believable and more interesting. And the last one, don't go to the well too many times. Suspense is a big one, but same thing with crying or something like that, having a real sad. If you try to make somebody cry like 17 times in a game, the 16th time they don't care about what's happening anymore. They're done. You want those experiences to be limited. The suspense as well. Who did it? Okay, you don't want to say who did it again 19, 20 times, or two guys who always look like they're ready to get into a fight. After a while, just like get them into a fight and get it over with. I'm tired of dealing with this, because then you aren't invested in the troubles of the characters, or any part of that emotional dimension. All right, ethical dimension. This is always a good thing, because right and wrong is nice and gray now in most pieces. I think modern writing tends to be more robust, but it tends to come out with wrong conclusions more now. So you have to be careful and creating ethicality, if that's a word, of characters. So, like, say one's highly ethical and one's highly unethical. Well, if someone's highly ethical, they should eventually come to a good, and by good, like he wins $1 million at the end. I'm talking like he should be able to reach something based on his goodness. He should reach a part in the plot where he achieves an understanding of a higher goodness. Let's put it that way. Or he flushes out his good ethics, and it comes with a good result. He shouldn't end up like going back on his ethics, and totally screwing everybody over, because that doesn't make sense at that point. Because what he'd have to be turned into the bad dimension. And likewise, I'm not a huge fan of anti-heroes anymore. I mean, I understand the need for them, and I kind of like them as an idea, but you can't haphazardly end up doing good all the time. At the end, it just wasn't believable. If you're going to have an anti-hero, he or she should either turn into a hero, or they should part from that and say, okay, I got lucky once. I didn't care, and I ended up doing something good, but that's not how it's always going to happen. So things of this are kind of what you should think about in your game, because, again, there are very common types of protagonists. Like the two I just mentioned are very normal. I always think of the Spider-Man one, the kid, or the I don't want to say naive, but someone who lives a lifestyle that is a little subdued, and then all of a sudden they're evoked into having to live this incredible experience and be the hero. And how does that handle it? That's another type of good protagonist for your game. As you go, you have to develop this. Now look at bullet number 3. Giving tough moral choices is good, because that's actually going to help you with the emotional dimension as well. But this ethical dimension is good. What I would suggest here is try to give reasonable responses. You know what I mean? Because I'm snarky, but not everybody's snarky. You can't give 3 snarky responses unless you're going to define your character as a snarky person. But that kind of takes up the choices out of it, if that makes sense. Why have a choice to a character who's snarky and is reluctant to do good? Because why there's no choice to be made there, or from a mental standpoint, if I'm going to play that actor. But if you give someone free rein to make their character to whatever they want, those tough moral choices are good. But again, if you do that, it's hard to give them every choice that they can possibly make. I understand that, but don't do the goody two shoes one, and don't do the super bad one. You know what I mean? Because good characters and by, again, ethically good characters just are not represented well usually in games. They're like doing good because I have to do good because good is good and I like to be good, that sort of thing. It's almost like they can't tie their shoes without some moral authority saying it's okay for them to tie their shoes. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is give, okay, we have to do this, but if we do this, some of your members of your team might die. That's a good moral choice that you have to make, because they have to decide, well, are we going to lose people that we love and get a higher good? Do the ends justify the means? That sort of thing. And that kind of plays out well. And that also allows the player to take a more, I don't want to say evil approach, but I always think of like the Baldur's Gates, where you actually choose the evil path. But sometimes in real life, the quote evil path is really just a little more frank, a little more over practical. It's probably a good way to explain it. But that's also kind of cool to allow a person to play that type of character as well. And again, the same thing goes with the NPCs. they can have all of these different ethical dimensions as well. They can be very good. They can be trying to be good. They can be, well, I'm a bad person, but I think I'm good. I think I'm doing the right thing, all the way down to the end. The last one, the avoid violence, is probably the one that's actually skipped the most in games. This is kind of something probably I pulled off of Ernest and Adams. It is good. Giving a purpose and context is extremely important. So, like if you're at war, it's fine to have a battle. If someone stole a kid's lunch money and you're going to go beat up the bully to give it back, that is fine. But violence in games is pretty natural. So this is one of the ones that people can kind of make mistakes and recover from. If you think about like GTA or, even like the MOBAs, why are you there fighting? It's because we're competing. That's that. So you can skip this last one, but I would say have a reason for skipping this last one, and then I think we can obey that ethical dimension. So that's the 3 E's in a nutshell. If you want to give, let's say, one golden rule of all of them is have everything feed into the game and serve the game, right? So nothing should be just there because you like it and you really wanted it in the game. And in fact, there's been a lot of famous people. I think Picasso once said, you have to be able to, if you want to be a great artist, you have to be able to kill your babies, which sounds horrific, and I agree, it sounds horrific. But the point that he was making was that sometimes you get in love with something so much that it actually counteracts what's going on or what you're trying to achieve by your work of art. In this case, our work of art is a game. So a story about barbarians, you don't bring in Plato in the middle of those barbarians and talk, because how are you going to make that work? How are you going to make Plato fit and solve the ethical, environmental, and emotional dimensions there? And if you can do all this stuff, then you can create an incredibly rich game. So go ahead and give it a try.